Welcome, Haymkarran.
Hello, welcome everybody. I hope I'm audible.
You are? Yep. If you can share your screen, we'll get started.
Sounds good. Let's get started. Thank you for the warm welcome and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody joining this session. I'm so glad that I've been chosen to give a session here today at UXDX. Let's get started right away. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm here to talk about a topic that's less spoken in the design teams. We often get stranded into concerns about delivery teams not delivering that well as far as CX is concerned, or visual outcomes are concerned, or UX outcomes are concerned. Hence, there is an imperative demand by companies that young CX professionals understand how do you measure your design decisions, and most importantly, how do you communicate them so that the value created out of UX is something that is measurable as an outcome, is something that is looked up to by the C-suite of the companies as a credible investment within the firm. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to go to full zoom. I hope this is visible well. Perfect. All right. Let's get started right away with a very quick problem. This is an actual statement given by one of our past clients, and he says, in the past, they've hired a couple of bunch of UX designers. Sadly, though, they learned that the outcome of their work only made the product tad bit more useful, but not credible enough. Now, why do you think this would have happened? One, the designers did not measure the design outcomes. Two, they were not able to effectively communicate the value driven approach while taking decisions. I'm sure you could think of many other problems as well, but let's just focus on these two for today. Okay, what am I going to cover? How can you, as a young designer, quickly understand the business? How can you understand product profiles? And what the hell is this PAM here, right? This TAM, right? Let's understand how do you identify a market around the product offerings? And let's understand how do you narrow down that market so that you're actually targeting the right users as far as creating an experience is concerned. Next, let's try and understand how do you create a solid case to invest in design. Point number 2 and 4 are correlative. How do you convert that understanding into a model so that it's sustainable enough for the companies to take it further? And most importantly, it is imperative for designers to understand that working in UX environments can never be a solo success or a siloed success. You always have to work with cross functional teams. Let's try to discuss a strategy around how do you work well with cross functional teams. Let's quickly jump onto the first one, which is understanding the business. Well, if you look at the left hand side, I've noted a couple of things as activities that you could do to understand who your stakeholders are. One, create a stakeholder mapping wherein you can understand what is the role of the stakeholder in the organization. What are they expecting you to do as a design professional, as a CX professional? How do they define their success within the organization? How can you help them define their success within the organization? How do you craft a thorough understanding of business vision and missions so that you go back to the C-suite convincingly and say, by understanding this, we are able to structure a roadmap that can help your business in the future? That could be your product roadmaps, that could be your field roadmaps, or that could be your feature driven roadmaps. And then there are a couple of activities listed here. But if you look at it, the crux is you need to build a collaborative design process. Unless and until you involve the business into every single activity you do, you cannot expect credible outcomes. You cannot expect credible results. You cannot expect the CISO to trust you to invest in the design, in the CX initiative that is expected to be taken. Moving on, here is a quick model that I've created that involves thoroughly every single stakeholder. On the left-hand side, you can see a couple of stakeholders. On the extreme right is my vision, my expectation from this model, this approach wherein every single instance you are defining, you are measuring, you're testing, you're documenting your progress with cross-functional teams and then taking the next steps. More on this later in the next session. I'll be taking a session on the 20th of December as well. So I'll be more than glad to describe on this later. Now let's look at how do you define an ROI model. Before we focus directly towards the steps, let's try and look at how do you identify problems and how do you measure them. I'm very sure you guys would be aware of most of these methods here. I'm not going to deep dive into definitions, but let's take examples and try to study this. Let's take one of the examples on the left-hand side. For example, let's take e-commerce as an industry. Now imagine if you need to redesign Amazon. What are the areas of focus that you would look into to set up a design roadmap, to set up a CX roadmap? Here are a few examples. How would you benchmark the decisions with certain KPIs? Here are some examples. On to the right, how do you benchmark certain decisions with the help of user research? Right? This slide might be slightly arguable depending on the context that you are into. Some of the methods described here might not fit well under the headings of, let's say, UX research. However, it is imperative to understand how do you take insights from this slide and how do you blend it within your own context where you work and try to create a strategy around it. So the way you identify problems are through a host of areas. One is identify the areas that you want to look into to find out problems, not feature sets, but problems. Second, identify certain key performing areas where identifiers where you try and understand here are the low-hanging fruits of improvement. Here are the feature sets that need additional set of efforts to bring to realization. And finally, with the help of some UX research methods, you'll also be able to understand problem areas. Those problem areas can be further bifurcated into product, into users, and as well into your market understandings. On the bottom right, you can look at certain people to speak to. These could be not limited to the ones mentioned here, but this is just a contextual understanding of what to do, how do you identify problems, what areas you look into for a particular space. Let's take the other example, which is the measuring example. I'm just taking one, which is, let's say, UX costs is to be considered. Now, what exactly is this? You reach out to a company which requires you to redesign a platform. They are not too keen in investing in design. So you have to build a solid business case so that the C-suite understands the importance of investing in UX, takes it a step further in realizing it amongst the internal teams, invests in the design process, brings in the right teams to make the right changes, and then finally measures the outcomes as required. Now, to do that, here's a simple thing that you could do. Identify a UX cost. This could be quantifiable or could be qualitative as well. For example, imagine Amazon. 200 customers cancel their purchases per day, right? This is a sample case. Now, the channels that you could leverage could be, let's say, the Seller Central Analytics or customer surveys in any format or fashion. The business impact here, for example, let's say the average cart value would be 50 USDs. Now, the total daily loss is huge for the company. And this is just a sample case, right? I'm just using Amazon as an example for you to consider. Another UX cost could be, for example, loss of brand loyalty or brand recall, right? And that stems from very small problems that you could solve. For example, let's say 100 users do not validate their email addresses. Now translate that to an e-commerce where you're not able to make purchases unless you validate, right? So these are examples of UX costs. Now, what I explained is just the first bit, which is UX costs, right? If you're following, I just explained the first bit. Now, step one in creating an ROI model is to document the current situation. Reach out to the stakeholders, try and understand the current situation in terms of, for example, let's say you get feedbacks around these lines, let's say declining revenues, shrinking market shares, frustrated customers, increasing investments in customer acquisition costs, right? And there could be many, many more, right? So step one for you is to understand thoroughly what is the current situation around the problem. Step two is to visualize and give a preview of CX fueled benefits. If you do this, if you rectify the journeys, here is a plausible positive outcome that you could realize in the organization, right? So now this is something that's on a very high level mentioned here in a slide. What you could do further is to quantify this and showcase a timeline. Let's say this year, here would be the roadmap. Second year, third year, fourth year onwards, this is the kind of roadmap that we expect to have the CX fueled benefits. And step 3 is most important. This is exactly where you're doing your blueprinting analysis, right? You want to understand, how do you invest in bringing this initiative to life, right? So how do you calculate the investments? Make sure you make everything transparent as a case for the clients to understand what steps to be taken from day one to the final day to ensure that whatever we think as a goal to achieve with the help of a CX ROI model could be achieved later, right? Now, step 4 is basically creating something which is sustainable as a model. It's not something that you create like a book, you close it off and that's it, you don't make amendments further, right? This is always getting changed based on a plethora of situations around you. So ensure that you bring in the right projections, document them well. Ensure you're really careful in doing the risk handling and mitigations. Ensure that your teams are forward thinking. Ensure that you define a very clear baseline for your product lines. You define a very clear baseline of service deliveries. You define a good North Star to be aspirant towards, so that every single member of your cross-functional teams realize it in the near future when they set their own goals. And finally, you also have multiple other methods through which you can create CX models around. Service blueprinting is something which is imperative in this case, wherein every stakeholder takes the right accountability to ensure that end-to-end journeys are addressed within the particular CX landscape or the product roadmap through the stakeholders. Let's have a quick talk on product profiling. I'm very sure the teams, some of you might here have looked at such a template earlier, right? This is fairly simple to understand, where you're trying to document what the product is, probably a use case or set of use cases around it, benefits for the business, benefits for customers, benefits for users, and also thinking around the demand generation, also thinking around certain validations that are required, also thinking something around boundaries or limitations that are necessary to understand how could you profile the product accurately. I've shown an Apple Watch on the right-hand side just to give you an example to consider. Imagine Apple wants to create a product that a customer can wear on the wrist and can use for measuring their fitness goals, right? So now try to visualize this entire step-by-step journey to create the entire profile for your Apple Watch. Now, what you should be careful around doing so is, for example, these two boxes over here. Some of you might be confused, why have I written user benefit versus customer benefit? Now, a gym, for example, might buy a couple of Apple Watches for their trainers so that they are able to map statistics accurately for the members joining the gym. Now that's a case where an entity becomes a customer of Apple, right? Now the trainer or the person going to the gym, like you and me, are the users here, right? Imagine it in this context. So the entities could be high-level customers, and users are actual people who are going to use the product, right? Another thing to take care of here is boundary conditions. Now I'm going to elaborate this more on this on the next slide, where we'll understand how do you narrow down a market that needs to be addressed, right? Now, at the start, we started off by saying, how do you identify and measure the value of UX, right? As a designer, many of us get into product engagements wherein we need to go through a thorough research phase. Now, sometimes I see designers getting fixated only to certain activities wherein they do, let's say, persona creations or empathy maps or journey maps. But how many of us actually try and understand from a business sense, right? From a business angle, how do these target groups that you define as personas are actually getting mapped? getting mapped by the company, right? Did you understand what is the target addressable market? Did you understand from a business standpoint what is a serviceable addressable and a serviceable obtainable market? Let's understand this very quickly with an example. Now, imagine you want to make a company, you want to build a company that sells water. I'm just looking at the times that we are in track. Okay, perfect. Now, imagine that you want to make a company that sells water. Let's say you want to sell 1 liter water bottles, and imagine there are 8 billion people in the world. At a high level, theoretically, the entire world would be a market. So that could imagine that to be a total addressable market. Yeah. Now, imagine, let's say you're in one part of the world. Let's say I'm, for example, in Dubai. Right now, Dubai is just one piece of the UAE. Right, it's not the entire UAE. Right, and I wish to start locally. I wish to start from here and then scale it up. Right now, my serviceable addressable market at the beginning gets limited just to you and just to Dubai, not even UAE. Forget the entire world. Right now, out of Dubai, over here on the top, right? Remember, I'm selling a 1 liter water bottle. How many of Dubai residents or people living in Dubai as expats as well would be willing to pay, for example, 20 dirhams, 30 dirhams, 40 dirhams, 100 dirhams for a 1 liter water bottle? Translate the currency to the country where you're living. Imagine, let's say, how many of you in the US would be willing to pay $2, $5, $10 for a 1 liter water bottle, right? Now, I'm just giving you examples. Now, how do you narrow down a market that becomes finally a target market, right? If you want to start a company today and say that, yes, the entire world population is my market, no, that will not be the case. You need to understand how do you narrow down a target market. And then
Haymkarran, we appear to have lost audio. I'm not sure what happened, but we just lost audio. I just heard a click, and then I can't hear anything you've said for the last maybe 20 seconds.
am I audible now?
You are. You're back audible again.
Perfect.
Thanks, and apologies for the interruption.
No worries. Also, if you could let me know where could I start again from?
You had said that the whole world is not your market.
Perfect. Thank you. I hope I'm audible now. Hello?
Yeah, you're audible now.
Okay, awesome. All right, perfect. So as designers, make sure that you always go back to the business and understand the target market from their sense, from a business sense, right? It's not just what you quickly create personas about and what you quickly create empathy maps about or your journey maps around. Make sure that whatever you craft as your insight reaches back to the business so that they validate it for you and really get back to you and say that, yes, this is the target market for us, or these are the segmented users for us, right? So this is exactly how you narrow down a market that is finally obtainable for the business, and you target only those customers that should be the ones that are highest in conversions initially for the business, and then you gradually grow the market size around it and try to acquire more and more customers with the betterments within the CX. Yeah. Final thoughts. We looked at a way to understand how do you study the business in terms of stakeholders. Apologies. Yep, I'm back. Apologies for that. So zooming back, we looked at how do you understand the business, how do you understand stakeholders, how do you understand responsibilities within the business, so that you can gel well within the teams, work well with the cross-functional teams, and the core focus throughout, either it is benchmarking through user research features, or either it is benchmarking through KPIs, either it is understanding certain focus areas to identify certain problems. the core focus should be this, which is identifying problems and not feature sets. Do not get into a deep dive wherein you're just documenting feature sets for a product. Make sure that you go back to the business and document core problems to solve. That will be the most valuable for the company. Second, I showed you a product loop, a design loop, wherein multiple stakeholders interface together, and there are no silos to wherein designers are working. There are no environments where designers are working in silos. That's exactly where this understanding or learning comes from. You need to have a shared understanding of everything around the work that you guys are doing. Make sure every stakeholder has the same information that you have, and everybody is on the same page of the entire design process or the design approach that you take. Make sure that you guys work on a unified product roadmap, and not work individually on siloed roadmaps that don't talk to the other cross-functional teams. You might have your own field roadmaps, but make sure that you have every discussion transparent among stakeholders so that you guys get the right collective buy-ins at the right time. Finally, you're not just supposed to deliver everything as a designer. Unless and until you measure every single outcome thoroughly with the help of either KPIs or any other matrices that you define, could be your SAS matrices, could be your CSAT matrices, or could be your effort scores. Anything that you define should ensure that you're able to measure every single outcome of your thought process, right? Of your design decision making. Do not just focus on delivering everything. And finally, make sure that you lead by influencing others. Make sure that you lead not by designation. Your work should influence others to do more, right? As designers, you should be able to instill the right trust in stakeholders, so that they gain the confidence that, yes, investing in design, investing in CX initiatives is something that will help them scale further, right? Once you do all of this collectively, that's when you'll be able to better communicate as a designer. Make sure that you'll be that's when you'll be able to better influence others as cross-functional teams as well, so that the value of design gets very clearly instilled amongst the business. And furthermore, what you would end up doing is that you'll create design-led organizations, and that's exactly where the piece of design, or the importance of design, is instilled right from the initial stages, the discovery stages of the processes within the company. Yeah. That should be it. Thank you guys for giving me this opportunity for the quick session. I'm open to questions, and I hope the insights shared from this session would help you in your own context, where you could apply some of these lenses, and make sure that you are able to build something credible for organizations wherever you are. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. That was a really interesting session. I really enjoyed it. We have gotten a few questions through, but if anybody does have any more questions, please feel free to share them. Be happy to put them to Haymkarran. But the first one, and I think this is a really good one, came in from Leslie, and she's asked, a lot of that seems to be product responsibility. So identifying the market and things like that. So where is the boundary between what's the responsibility of design versus what's the responsibility of product?
I'll give you another lens to look at it. The boundary is not where we are segregating responsibilities. Rather, the way I recommend looking at it is that you merge together as one team and ensure that designers understand everything through and through. The designers may not have the business acumen to define the markets at the beginning. What they can, however, do is get this collective understanding from the product teams and ensure that we are crafting a roadmap for that specific target market. Unless there is a joint understanding between the designers and the product teams, whatever you may wish to create with that initial learning might not be fruitful.
Great. So it ties into your silos everywhere. It's kind of replace those and
Exactly.
get into more of the team learning. That's great. There's another question from Francesca. She's asked, when at the start you mentioned previewing benefits as one of your points,
Yes.
and you used the example of the 200 checkouts.
Yes.
But how do you validate that that's accurate before you do the research, and not something, you gave the example of people could be going to checkout because that's the only place they see the shipping costs. So you're not going to convert every single one of those.
That's a pretty fair point, wherein we might be partly true in documenting the outcomes, and we might not have the right association to that being a UX cost. However, having said that, it still gives you an initial high-level understanding of where the pitfalls are within the digital journeys. It's not something that becomes a thumb rule for you to take it further. But having said that, like I mentioned, UX costs need not just be quantifiable. They can be qualitative as well, wherein you understand behaviors of customers, you understand the notions of customers, you try and understand through multiple other ways of what are the dilutions within the experience. For example, you could have your SAS scores, or you could have your CSAT scores into picture. There could be many other ways to understand the behavior of customers around your products and services. So very true. Costs alone, quantitative costs alone, might not be the right thumb rule to relate it to UX costs, but there are many other ways to define UX costs that give you the right picture of the customer behavior around the products.
Brilliant. Thank you for that answer, and thank you for sharing your presentation there. I really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody out there listening enjoyed it as well. So this is all we have time for, but thank you very much, Haymkarran.
Thank you so much, everybody, and all the best to the next speaker, and enjoy the day. Thank you.
Thank you.